show. It is this Effen show. It is this Effen show.
Welcome to This Effen Show,
a podcast by two trans men of a certain age.
Hey, we're back. I'm Uncle Drew.
I'm Spencer, trans dad.
Fantastic. How have you been?
Good. You?
Good. Wrapping up summer. Going through adventures.
Well, and you guys have had like ridiculously hot weather.
Yeah, it's October and it's going to be 99 degrees today. Like it's stupid.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking to a friend of ours who lives in Oakland, and she's going to try to escape because it was going to be like 104, 105.
Yeah, it's wicked. It is wicked.
Yeah, no. I'll take what I've got, which is like 60 and rainy.
Not the rain. But
I know it's not your weather. It's not your favorite.
It's not. It makes me sad. I get sad.
I know you get. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're going to need to get one of those sad lights this year.
Yes.
Because, the Southern California girl that I live with
is hard. She needs her own parade. She needs Sarah McLachlan. I get it. I understand. It's rough.
Oh.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Oh, I think we had a little freeze. So we're back.
Yeah,
so
all good.
Listen, there's some stuff that's been on my mind, and I want to pick your brain specifically. All right. Because we are both men of a certain age. We can look in our rearview mirror and see 50 at least, right? 51 at least for both of us. And it's this concept of, you had a different relationship with your dad, your actual father, than I had with my mini stepdads, right? They were all garbage. And it sounds like your dad was like a real quality guy, right? So,
I think he was a really good guy. Which is not to say that we didn't have conflict, because we did, which I think was more about the fact that we're so similar that that is what caused us to butt heads.
Yeah. Here's my question. So as a trans man, right? As a little dude growing up, whether we knew it or not, we were those little dudes, right? The idea of male role model, right? From when we were young trans dudes to who we are now. I don't have kids. I know you have actual kids, right? But like this male role model, this fatherly energy, right? Like, can you talk to me a little bit about how you look at how you came into your power within that fatherly role? And I know you are also, I think it's safe to say, identify as daddy, right? Yeah. So how you came from like observing your dad, your male role models, into coming into your own sense of trans mask man power father figure.
Yeah, one of the things that I remember in like even in kindergarten, when we would be playing in school and like playing house or whatever, I was always the dad.
Yeah.
And nobody ever questioned it, which, given that it was 1968, is pretty progressive, right?
Yeah.
I think I really did luck out in a lot of ways, because my dad really was a great guy, in so many ways. And, and I still feel like I struggle to even fill half of his shoes.
Wow.
In so many ways. He was an adventurer. He was multifaceted. He was interested in so many things, which I think drove me to be interested in so many things. And I learned a lot about this really broad range of stuff from him, whether it be music or reading and appreciating maps from different eras, sailing, woodworking, how to fix things, Like my dad grew up on a farm, so you you learn how to be a jack of all trades when you grow up on a farm. And my grandfather was equally a great guy. Had more of a sense of humor than my dad.
Oh.
Yeah, he was my grandfather was a jokester.
Well, with your humor, do you feel more like grandpa or do you feel more like dad? Because you're a funny guy.
I think my humor is probably a little bit more like my grandpa.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I'm a little bit more willing to just cut a joke. here
Okay.
and there, you know. But when I think about them, so my grandfather was born in 1895, and my dad was born in 1936. So clearly, the worlds that they grew up in were very different, and
Yeah.
they were in this at that time small town in northern Sweden, and yet neither of them really exhibited like a lot of toxic masculinity. They were
Mm.
very supportive of the women in their lives. They weren't afraid of crying in front of other people. They weren't afraid of being sentimental.
Now, talk to me a little bit about
Um,
how much do you think, because I'm not Swedish, how
right.
much Swedish culture influenced that? Like, is this typical for, do you think, of that era?
I don't think it's typical at all because like my
Okay.
mom's dad was the like complete opposite in a
Okay.
lot of ways of my dad's dad. But when I look at my uncles on both sides of the family,
Yeah.
um, and certainly when I look at my cousins, there is a level of egalitarianism that I think kind of cuts across everything, right? And so
Hmm.
that I think is very much driven by Swedish culture, which
Okay.
has a history of not being so toxic,
Okay.
and I, if I think sort of more philosophically about it, I also think back to like the history of the Norse pantheon of gods, right? Which includes men and women. It's not a
Yeah.
monotheistic, male driven
Yeah.
culture. And despite the fact that Sweden became Christianized in, what, the 11th century, we still maintain an awful lot of our Norse pagan history and beliefs and practices melded into this
Love it.
Christian domain,
There's room for Jesus and
and
Freya.
kind of,
Yeah.
I mean, so for example, at Christmas time, we have a julbok, which is a Christmas goat, right?
Oh,
And it's like, why the hell do we have a Christmas goat? What does that have to do with anything? So, Christian theology tries to tell you it's about something about the devil, blah, 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 right?
yeah.
Yeah, no, it goes back to Thor and the two goats that pulled his ship through
Yeah.
the skies, right?
Okay. Okay.
So, and then we have St. Lucia Day, which is supposed to be based on either a Catholic saint
Okay.
from Italy or from an older story about a woman who brought light on the darkest day of the night. Hello, solstice, um,
Yeah. Okay.
in
So
Sweden. So you find those places where our culture is so old and is so ingrained in who we are that it managed to survive in some very real ways, despite Christianity being
what it
the
is.
the the thing that was adopted.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then we pretty swiftly, switched from Catholicism to Protestantism. In the Swedish Lutheran Church, which is what I grew up with, up until 1992, it was the state religion. Like you were born, you were a Lutheran.
Oh. All right. I didn't know that.
Um, and even so, like the Lutheran Church had had women pastors for a long time.
Oh.
It was much more egalitarian. Most people only went to church on like maybe Christmas and Easter.
Yeah.
Most people did not go regularly. My dad's mother was very devout and also never forced it on anyone else. Like my grandfather didn't go to church with her. She went.
Okay. And there was no scandal.
And it wasn't a big deal. Like,
Nice.
so I think Swedes in general have always had kind of this more egalitarian view of things. And then if you look even back to, say, the Viking era, women owned property.
Yeah.
Women were in charge of the household if men were off raiding. And now we know with some degree of certainty that women were also raiders
Yeah.
and
Going to
soldiers
war.
as well. So, and then there's just other like weird stuff about Vikings that I love. Like Vikings took a bath at least once a week when the norm in Europe was like once a year.
Okay, you gotta wash all that rating off. You gotta.
Exactly, and you want to be able to braid that beard and you
Yes,
know.
without the funk in
So,
it. Yes.
yeah, so I think when I just sort of look historically at the arc of Swedish society, I think there's always been a sense of sort of less toxicity in some ways,
Refreshing.
which is fascinating given, the ferocity of of the reputation of Vikings, right?
Right. This is very He-Man.
Even with all of that like really aggressive hyper masculinity and growing big beards and all of that, still there is a notion of egalitarianism. Women could get divorced if they wanted to. They could own property, which was not the norm in other parts of Europe.
Yeah. So growing up with that culture, right? And nothing's perfect. We still obviously
Right.
toxic masculinity life will find a way,
And I grew
right?
up in this country, which is,
Right.
patriotic, patriarchal bullshit.
How did that, unfortunately I had to unlearn a lot of misogyny, patriarchy, bigotry that I was raised with. And it was a hard lesson. But if
Yeah.
you're in this household and maybe this, and yes, you had biculturals, right? One not as enlightened as the other, right?
But I also didn't, I saw my grandparents like once a year when I was a kid. And when we would go, we would stay at my dad's family farm. We wouldn't stay with my mom's dad. He lived in an apartment because my grandmother died when I was 4.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so like we might see him a couple of times, but when we would go, I would be at my grandparents' house. So that's who I spent time with.
And did being on this farm where you figured it out, and you had to teach yourself, you had to learn yourself, you had to figure it out, right? Like, how did that inform, and seeing your role models act out their masculinity, right? How did it inform your idea of masculinity when you started figuring out really who you were?
You know what? My masculinity began the day I was born. So,
Yeah.
so for me growing up, I had one cousin that I hung out with primarily during the summers, who is my dad's youngest sister's son, and he and I are like a year apart in age. Yeah. He and I were the ones who ran around and did everything together. And
Mm.
I had a short haircut. We both dressed in our Adidas tracksuits, and we played a lot of football, i.e., soccer, uh,
Yeah.
and ran around the woods together. Like it was like having a brother for the summer for me.
Yeah.
And I wasn't treated like a girl. Whereas when I would be back in the States, there was much more of a push to be placed into that category
Yep. Yeah.
by adults, not so much by my peers. I mostly hung out with boys at school, with other boys at school, but by adults, there was this idea that I had to fit a certain, much more narrow category of being.
And that experience, yeah, I can relate to that. And I think that's where the shame starts to come in, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like I'm hanging out with the dudes and it's cool. You taller people are telling me I have to go over here and that I'm not supposed to be there and that's not how I'm supposed to act. And I'm like, that's when the
Right. And
shame
I
seeps
shouldn't be
in.
roughhousing. I shouldn't. I remember, so we had
Yeah.
my dad had put up a basketball backboard on the side of the house by the garage. Yeah. And people used to say to my parents, "Oh, you have a son," and they'd be like, "No,"
Oops.
and people would be like, "But you have a basketball hoop,"
Basketball.
and they'd be like, "Yeah," because our child likes to play basketball.
And
So
that was not
even those
normal.
kinds of things, I was aware of people saying those kinds of things,
Yeah.
and of my parents having to defend on some level my existence.
And I think it's those incidents, and we all have our versions of them, right? It's those incidents when I look back, that's when healthy masculinity development got interrupted, right? And
Right.
I understand it was the time and they didn't know, they weren't intentionally trying to do this, right? But the harm was done, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm not preaching to the, I am preaching to the choir here, right? Like I missed out on developing healthy masculinity in a progressive way as I grew up, as I get to know myself, right? Because
Right.
any display of masculinity was instantly shamed, you know, and I didn't have any fatherly role models because they were all garbage people, right? Like I had role models. It was like, now that I look back, I'm like, oh, I learned exactly who I didn't want to be. It just took me a minute to realize they're awful. I don't have to be like them. But I had to,
Right.
you know, it was painful to unlearn my ideas of masculinity that I learned from my father figures.
Yeah. Do you remember any like TV or movie characters that you were particularly drawn to in the way that they presented masculinity?
Yeah, I liked Starbuck from the original Battlestar Galactica. He was a hero, but he was kind of a goofball, right? Like
Right.
that you could be heroic and funny. That to me, I was like, oh, I like that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was when I was like kind of a littler kid. Man, great question. Did you have any that you were like that?
Yeah, I think a lot of like, so I had a deep fascination and still do with the Old West. And so Westerns were like a big draw for me
Yeah,
um, growing up. But like the characters that I tended to be drawn to were the ones who were both sort of stereotypically masculine in presentation, but also gentle at heart and
yeah,
kind of looking out for the community. So like Haas on
yeah.
Bonanza,
Okay,
or later Grizzly Adams when that was on.
Chris Evans was kind of hot too, so good job.
Well, then, yeah. Um, and so those kinds of, and even Marshall Dillon on Gunsmoke,
Yeah,
because it was about justice and about doing right by people. And whether I was consciously aware of it or not as a kid, here's a man who's in love with a sex worker and will defend her to the death,
yep, yep,
you
yeah,
know?
and is a good righteous man.
That is a
Yeah,
good righteous man right there who sees past societal norms about what kinds of work are acceptable and what aren't.
yeah, yeah. Wow, good connection. Yeah. I think I felt the shame got into me so early about being a masculine kid that I felt guilt and shame even around trying to identify with male characters, right? Like it felt like I
Interesting.
was still doing something wrong, right?
Wow.
Yeah, I look back and I'm like, I was always drawn to like the strong female character of any TV show because she felt safe, right? Like, and I didn't identify with her. I just felt that was safe. So yeah,
It was still a powerful representation of leadership or
yeah,
um, maybe what we might consider more masculine attributes.
yeah. Also, I'm spinning this around in my head. I'm like, what does this mean? So I was obsessed with Mr. Rourke on Fantasy Island. Like it was my favorite, and I was obsessed with him because he seemed so powerful to me. He got a little
Right.
goofy when he went to hell and fought the devil, and then even as a little kid, I was like, "Y'all have this is silly.
Totally
You
jumped the
jumped the
shark
shark."
on that show.
Yes,
They really
but
jumped
like
the shark.
that masculinity of like tailored suit, right? Quiet
Right.
power. I know how to fix everything. Nothing. I am prepared for like that. To me, I'm like Mr. Rourke was kind of my like, yeah, yeah. Mr. Rourke and Joe from Facts of Life. Those were my masculine idols.
Good choice.
Yes. Right?
Good choice. Like who amongst us did not know that
Joe.
Joe was butch and was in love with Blair.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
very drawn to that character.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're back, and I want to pick up a little bit about, we were talking kind of pre-transition, and by that I just mean starting T. Don't come for me, right? Pre-transition, about who our masculine role models were, who we were as masculine people. When you started T, when you took big steps towards transition, did you have role models? Did anything change for you? Were you just like, I'm me and now I'm on T, or was there like intentionality or introspection on what does it mean to be masculine?
There was definitely introspection. So one of the things that I think I was really fortunate in, even pre-starting T, was being in the leather community from the time that I was in my late 20s. My masculinity was really celebrated and recognized. And so, I had people calling me daddy from the time that I was 28 years old, right?
So you already had that energy was already there.
Right. So that energy was already there, and it was just being recognized. And like the women's leather community here, they were nice enough to me, but they weren't particularly welcoming. Whereas the men's community was really welcoming of me. And so I had suddenly all these cis gay men who I could look to for guidance or for inspiration on how to be.
Mm.
And so I took everything that I knew about how to be a feminist,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, one of the great gifts that I got was growing up in the 60s and 70s, right? Because like my whole life has been shaped by the political processes of the time,
Yeah.
whether that be the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the gay rights movement, anti-war
Yeah. Yeah.
sentiments, everything about the Watergate hearings, Nixon being disgraced and having to leave office. Which why could we not replicate that?
Word. Well, different
Again,
consciousness.
having been an athlete as a kid and recognizing the value of Title IX and why that was important for me to be able to participate in sports. So taking all of what I'd learned
Yeah.
from all of those movements and then channeling them into a masculine presentation and a way of being, building on top of the less toxic masculinity that my dad and other men that I knew displayed, kind of brought me to a place of being a daddy that was about being nurturing and caring and guiding,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
not about being authoritarian or
Yeah.
domineering. Dominant, yes, but not domineering. Like there's no reason to replicate a process that's oppressive. It's like
Yes.
I got to pick and choose. I got to take the best parts of masculinity and maleness and discard the rest.
Yeah. That's what it is, right?
Yeah.
I think maybe that's the magic of trans masculinity, right?
Yeah.
Is because it wasn't just given to us, we get to be a little more introspective on it. We get to be a little more discerning about it and do exactly what you said. What parts do I like and what
Right.
parts do I not like? Yeah.
And I think on top of that, having, I started T when I was 32. So, and I came out as queer when I was 14. So I had a long period of time to just live as
Yeah.
this queer masculine embodiment, right? And so the dynamics of butch femme interaction, because my attraction is and was to femmes,
Mm-hmm.
the dance of butch femme interaction is very rooted in some aspects of male female interaction in society, but in a really considered and performed way, right? So like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the chivalry that I chose to express as a butch, I still express as a man.
Mm-hmm.
And others might see that as me being, somebody who wants like, the whole trad wife life,
Oh.
right? Like
Oh.
return to the
Okay.
1950s, right? Because I will pull
Okay.
out a chair. I will open a door. I will walk on the street side of the
Yeah.
sidewalk. And I'll shift if we move to a different street, right?
Yeah.
But for me, that's a performance around butch femme dynamics, not at all about male female roles.
Yeah. Yes.
So no matter
Yeah.
what it looks like to the outside, it's the intentionality that I bring to the interactions that I have.
Yeah. I remember trying to explain it to a cisgendered heterosexual man. And it was him and his girlfriend. So it wasn't just like a dude being a dude, right? He was like, well, what's the difference between my chivalry and yours? And I was like, I don't have time to go into the nuances of it. Here's your 5 cent answer. If the woman I'm with tells me she doesn't like it, then I won't do it.
Then I stop.
Then I stop. There's a difference, right? Like it doesn't occur to you, either one of you, that you don't have to participate in it. That's the difference. Participation
Yeah.
is voluntary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's intentional on both parties' part.
Yeah. Although I gotta say, one of my favorite stories was like 2008. I was walking into like a CVS, and an older woman was coming out, so I held the door for her. And she's like, "Oh, thank
Yeah.
you, young man. Your mother raised you right." It's like, yes, ma'am. Yes, we'll just yes.
Yeah. We'll just go with that
We'll go with that. Yeah.
because I don't have time to
Um,
explain to you.
yeah. And I like this topic of like the intention of the interaction
Right.
in these performed gender roles. I think there's something there that we could talk about more for next time. Also, I think we could go on and on about how we embody father figure energy in our life now, whether
Yeah.
we're dads or not, right? Like we are masculine men of a certain age. I think people just automatically look to us and see like dad or daddy, right?
Well, but it's not just an age thing, right? Like daddy energy is you either have it or you don't. I hate to kind of
Yes.
put it in that way, but um, I mean, I know boy identified
Yeah.
men in community who are older than I am.
Yeah.
And it would never occur to me to think that they embody anything about being daddy because they're
Daddy.
just not.
Just
They're boys,
yeah.
right?
Yes. Yep.
Whereas I think for me, kind of everybody knew from day one, okay, well, that's a daddy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm envious, but I'm like I celebrate for you that you had that experience, right? Because
Yeah,
I said this earlier to you when we were just talking that I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to be this age
yeah.
because that energy was there, but it was constantly shamed, it was constantly denied, it was constantly punished. And like I have been waiting to be able to embody this energy. And so here's two guys and you had this experience where you were like, this is who I am and it's non-negotiable, and I had to fight my way into it. I think that's also the beauty of the trans community, right? Is
Absolutely. And we get to look to one another as being role models.
yeah.
I was
Yeah.
lucky enough when I transitioned to know a handful of trans men who had transitioned before me. And so I got to look at them and how they had navigated life, one of whom was also a father. And so I
Yeah.
got to see him raising his child
Mm.
and what that looked like. And, when I was first transitioning, I think in large part because of being a lawyer, like I met all the other trans guy lawyers, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so like the
Of course.
network of people that I was able to cobble together early on was really expansive. Like, I knew a guy in England. He and his wife have 4 kids. And he had transitioned a few years before me. So getting to hear his experience and also coming from a different country. Like, what was his experience in England
Yeah.
like?
Yeah.
We got to share stories with each other, and we got to look at the ways in which we were embodying masculinity in a different way.
Yes. And I think that is, again, part of the trans magic. We get to look at masculinity embodied in different ways. I don't
Right.
know, and I'm fully willing to be wrong. I don't know if cis men hold space for each other to talk about embodying masculinity in different ways, right? Like, it's never hit my radar,
I have no idea.
right?
I don't know.
Maybe they are my brothers, my cis brothers. If you are, I'm my bad, but I don't know, and I never witnessed or heard about. And yet it is a part of our experience, is talking about the spectrum of masculinity, right? Like,
Right.
how do you embody it? How do I embody it? Which parts do you like? Which parts do you not like? Right? Like,
Well,
what is authentic to you in your masculinity?
and beyond that, we also have a better understanding of cis women and what they go through in life to give us greater sensitivity to the things that still oppress them, and how can we be better allies
Yes.
to combat that shit.
Yes. I say this all of the time. I think I've said it here. I'll say it again. I don't know what it's like to be a woman. I have no idea, but I know what
I
it's
don't
like to
either.
be treated like one.
Yep.
I know exactly what it's like to be treated like one in our society. I know exactly what it's like to be treated as someone who doesn't conform to gender roles, right? So,
Right.
yeah, that informs me and motivates me to be a better man. And I use man in air quotes only because I am masculine. That's who I am, right? But it informs me to be a better person who is masculine.
Right.
So, yeah,
And
I don't.
you and I don't know what it is like to be a conventionally pretty woman in our culture,
No,
but
they're just
we
fuck.
have dated and partnered with conventionally pretty women in our culture, and we
Yeah,
listen to what they tell us.
yeah, yes, and we believe them.
And we believe what they say instead of it just being like, the Charlie Brown teacher voice, wah, 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 wah,
Yeah,
which is
I'm
honestly
acknowledging
what
your
I think a
noise.
lot of cis men hear when they talk to women.
Yeah, I am performing listening. That's
Right.
what it looks like, right? I am performing
Right.
listening intently to you, dear. What are you saying? No, no.
Meanwhile, they're thinking about, whatever else.
Yeah. Well, I like this. I think there's a lot more we could talk about. I think there's
Oh, yeah.
a lot to unpack here, but you know, thinking about male role models through all of our life and how we then embody male role models,
Yeah.
energy, right? I just never heard it talked about in trans space, right? Like
Yeah.
it's such a part of masculinity. It's all I know. Maybe femininity has female role, that whole process too, but for us, but I've just never heard any trans men talk about, here's my male role models and here's how I now embody that energy, right? So I think
Right.
I appreciate this conversation. I mean, your
And
insight is
how does
great.
that change when you actually do transition? Like, I I thought that I was pretty aware of like social norms, only to discover that once I started looking unmistakably male, like,
Mm-hmm.
oh shit, I need to adjust some stuff. I can't just walk straight at a woman on the sidewalk.
Yes.
I have to cross the street.
Yes.
I have to, I have to behave in this way on elevators so as
Yes.
to not appear threatening. We've talked about it on the show before about sort
Yeah.
of gaying it up to help
Be less threatening.
alleviate fear, right?
Yep.
It's like, oh,
Yeah.
girl, you don't need to worry about me.
I'm safe,
You
girl.
know,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
safe. It's all right.
Yeah. And I
I
am not
might
naturally
look
that
this
gay.
way, but really, I'm not.
Yes. I'm not one of them.
You
Yeah. I'm
know,
not that guy. I
and
am not that guy. Yeah.
yeah, and I think especially I become very aware of as I've gotten older and my look has become this.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, once I started growing my beard out, I look like a biker dude,
Yeah.
right? Which
Mm-hmm.
carries a whole bunch of assumptions behind it. And so either you are violent
Yeah.
or you're racist or you're misogynistic, you're right wing,
You are unsafe.
you're uneducated, right? There's all of these presumptions that come behind this look for straight people. In queer culture, I just look like a bear,
Yeah. And a daddy. You look like a daddy. So,
and
yeah.
so
Which is the safest.
depending
Right?
on,
Like,
so depending on who the viewer is, they experience my look in a different way.
yeah.
And so I've become really conscious of that, which is why I often choose to wear shirts that are very politically provocative when I'm out in the world
Yeah.
because it fucks with people's perceptions, right? It's like if I have a shirt, a pro-choice shirt, and so, I'll braid my beard or do this because otherwise you can't see the writing on the shirt. But
Yeah.
I get people looking at me like,
Hey now.
wasn't expecting,
That. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or I'll wear like protect trans youth, or I wear any number of Harris Walls shirts at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to me to see the reactions that I get from other people.
I think the work we're all working towards is a society free of assumptions, but they're
Right.
there, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we can talk about this next time about where do we belong based on the assumptions of our look.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
yeah,
Well, we were talking about that earlier, and that will definitely be the topic of the next show
yeah.
is
So
where do we actually belong?
where do we belong? And I mean, not because I feel like I belong there, but am I welcome? Where do I belong where I'm
Right.
welcome? So yeah, based
Right.
on how we look. So yeah. Well,
And
thank you,
how
sir.
much how much
I've
how much discomfort do I want to cause other people?
yeah. How much signaling do I have to do? Yes, yeah. We'll pick that up
Yes,
next time.
all of
So
that. We'll talk about that next time.
yes. Well, thank you, sir. This has been insightful as always. I appreciate it.
Same here.
I'm Uncle Drew. That is Trans Dad Spencer.
Yep. And this is this effing show.
Yes, it is. And so, we will see you next time. As always, stay safe,
As all.
stay cool.
Yep.
Bye.
Hey, thank you for listening to this episode of This Effin' Show. Do us a favor and give us a follow on Instagram and YouTube at This Effin' Show. And you can email your comments or questions to us at thiseffinshow@gmail.com. See you next time.